Jordan has had a long career in special effects and media. And during that career, he's always been on the leading edge of technologies. If there's something new that's coming out, Jordan no doubt has his hands on it and is among the first to be doing so. Jordan has also had some very noteworthy projects with supporting the likes of Madonna, Michael Jackson, and Walt Disney. So not only is he familiar with leading edge technologies, but he's applying that for really profound purposes. Jordan has a very interesting story to tell about how he has migrated from various technologies. And so we're going to be talking about that today, so let's get started. Let me welcome Jordan. Thanks for meeting us today. Really appreciate your taking time to speak with us, Jordan. And maybe you want to say a few words about yourself just to get started to acquaint the audience.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Jordan Halsey, and I have been working with 3D roughly since 1992, when I kind of first discovered it in architecture school. I'd already been working on computers a lot, doing graphics on a old Apple and an early generation Mac. And then at SciArc, we had a computer lab, and I discovered 3D for the first time. And just kind of continued to work with that throughout my life, and have done it in various different forms, usually starting mostly with architecture, kind of moving to architectural visualization, and then to live entertainment, where I worked in the world of live entertainment as far as design and visualization, meaning live stage shows, working with a production designer named Bruce Rogers. And then in 2001, 2000 roughly is when I started transitioning into what was the emerging market of motion graphics that hadn't really been much of a discipline until then. We'd done some early stuff in the late 90s with After Effects, when it was Koza After Effects. Then Adobe bought it, and then but that kind of world really came together, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when individual artists started to be able to kind of produce works en masse. And so since then, I've been involved with various different forms of 3D rendering, involving different fields, mostly, I would say, in the world of a lot of high-res rendering for visuals, for LED displays, for live performance, such as Michael Jackson, as he working on that, as well as various projection mapping shows. And then roughly since 2015 has been really mostly concentrated on real-time development, VR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and was a technical director for a virtual reality company. And now I'm currently a teacher, professor at USC in the cinema school. And we also, I'm a technical director for a lab. Well, I can't say the name of the lab yet, but it's a lab that's focused on virtual and augmented reality. The announcement, I think, is in a week of what the actual name will be. But it's we're focused on virtual reality, augmented reality, real-time technologies, real-time volumetric rendering. I'm very interested in volumetric rendering, point clouds, and data reconstruction and stuff like that.
So all the latest and greatest, Jordan. Yeah, can you hear me, Jordan? Sorry.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Oh, I didn't. Yeah, that was a question. Yeah. I guess. I'm very interested in forward technology. So I'm very interested in, working. I'd always been actually very interested in photogrammetry and match moving and kind of photo modeling from the early days when you kind of had to do it yourself. And then working with, starting then in 2005, working with a very early version of Nuke, and being able to kind of build out these reconstructed Panavision kind of pano camera moves that you could do with 3D compositing. That you couldn't really do in Shake at that time, and because Nuke just had such a better 3D space. And then that moving into what is now kind of contemporary photogrammetry with reality capture or meta shape. But I'm very interested in the real-time application of that, and creating point clouds with things like real-time LiDAR, like Ouster. And you can use there's various real sense cameras, depth sensing cameras like Stereo Labs, stuff like this.
So Jordan, I think one of the things our audience probably would be interested to hear, when they're faced with a project, they might be aware that there is a technology that is new and emerging and could potentially help them in their project. But to go down that path would be potentially a great risk, right? Because there's always a project deadline. And when you step into a technological area for which maybe there's little experience, either your own or the industry's, that's a big gamble. And I think your career seems to be consistently taking those gambles. So I'm curious, and as I said, I think our audience would be as well. Like that, why are you such a risk taker? What's the risk reward that you balance, and how do you manage to employ those new technologies on a project, given that there no doubt are deadlines that are imposed upon you and you're feeling all this pressure to get things done? So how does that work?
Well, yeah, it could be very stressful. I'll be honest.
I can imagine.
There's been times where, I can kind of like think of, the light field job, this was a very stressful job because this had never been done at all, in the sense of no one had ever really shot with this camera with this large of a light field volume and integrated CG in the kind of way that we were. And there were so many different technical limitations that we had to deal with. And it kind of, brought together this encompassing field of a lot of different things. But like in this example, when I met with them, it became kind of clear to me that, really what we had to be concerned with was like depth information, depth processing, disparity information. They were kind of like these traditional 2D to 3D workflows that had been around for a while already. And I've always been interested in depth maps and kind of like reconstruction and things like deep, where you can do renderings and kind of reconstruct that 3D information as point clouds and nuke. And so it kind of seemed like it was logical that, hey, like, we were like, hey, this is what it is, correct? And they would be like, yes, this is what it is. And then it comes down to actual, production time, and you've got to kind of like figure out also that somehow it seems to be that these also get tied with very quickly moving timelines. So you have to really hit it running a lot of times because they're potentially don't have these great giant budgets because of this kind of like new technology that they're trying to push the boundaries of. But usually I try to see a path that's forward before I would agree to it. I think that there's a lot of things, that, like, for instance, coming from VR, in the late 90s, as an example, one of the things I used to do is I worked with this company called Or Virtual, and we were making CD-ROM games sometimes. Amongst some of the things we did, we were using Macromedia Director. And at this time, we were using QTVR. So we were already doing these panoramic renders in the late 90s and kind of making these video games where we would transition between them. So I had been very familiar with that kind of panoramic space for a long time. And then that kind of transferred into Nuke when you could build out these kind of things in kind of photo model and reproject pretty easily. So it's kind of, I would say I try to calculate a risk, but it can be very stressful, for sure.
So it seems some of the key prerequisites, if I am observing some patterns correctly with you, I mean, you had some foundational knowledge before you actually took that technological risk. And that was an important prerequisite, it seems. Probably, I'm guessing also that maybe there were some projects that were low risk that you could take some chances on, that you did your initial experiments on. Is that kind of typical of maybe how you approach this, or did you just jump right into a project and go for it?
No, I definitely, but I think that, I mean, that's one of the, for me personally, like what I love is tinkering and looking at things and trying to break things apart and figure out how things are done. So I'm kind of always doing that anyways, like, I mean, and right, I'm especially lucky right now because of working at USC and having been there for 3 years and kind of like having developed a little bit of network. It allows me to interact with other people and kind of like kind of go down paths that I might not have been exposed to normally. So like right now, I'm working on a project that involves robotics and photogrammetry and programming automation, stuff like that. And so, I have some minimal, but some robotic experience. I understand photogrammetry, and I can kind of bring those things together. But it's the constant playing around. I love playing around with stuff.
In today's day of super specialization, being knowledgeable of all these different areas is really difficult to do, right? You're professionally, you're often pigeonholed into a particular area, right? So it sounds like you not force this upon yourself. You did it because you loved doing it. You loved tinkering, but the fact that you had these practical experiences in a variety of different technological areas was also a key to your success, would you say?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that that's, like, I mean, it's kind of like six of one, half a dozen. I mean, they both have their benefits and drawbacks, right? I don't like sometimes people like look at me and they don't quite understand how I fit into maybe like a more traditional pipeline, right? And then sometimes you have companies that are uh, more kind of not bound to traditional pipelines and technologies, or you have places like Disney Imagineering where they're constantly doing things like that, And so I think that I really never wanted to work in a traditional pipeline, a traditional effects pipeline. That wasn't really my thing. I didn't want to like be working in that kind of, so I've always tried to take jobs where I'm kind of maybe in control of the whole thing as much as I possibly can be. That it's not always the case, or that it is kind of furthering myself. I try not to take jobs that are like, pushing me backwards, I guess, right? And I'm currently very lucky because of my job at USC that I can really focus when I do outside work or consulting. I can really focus on the things that I only want to focus on. And I can spend the rest of my time doing a lot of research, which is what I've been doing primarily. So yeah.
Okay, so maybe you touched on something interesting. Folks who are watching this may be interested in getting in touch with you to add them to their team to help out on some various challenges. You would be available to do that sort of thing, yeah?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm saying, yeah, I am for sure. I'm pretty like booked solid
Yes,
at
I
the
can imagine.
moment. And I'm very careful about the jobs that I would take, So I'm very lucky like that. I can be
Yeah,
careful about the jobs I'm taking, but I'm currently,
right.
yeah, we're right now we're doing like the robotic photogrammetry thing, and we're working on a projection mapping in a something in Shenzhen, China, which is quite cool. It's going to
Yeah.
be, we're going to like map a giant grain silo on the outside and a grain silo on the inside, which presents some interesting issues because it's a cylindrical, completely cylinder, and it's like about 24 meters by 12 meters tube. And so it presents a lot of interesting
Yeah,
challenges.
exactly. So speaking of some interesting projects you've been on, we introduced you and that you were involved in doing some work with Madonna and Michael Jackson and Disney. Maybe can you kind of tell us a bit about those projects?
Sure. I mean, actually, the Madonna video was really like my first real, believe it or not, it was like my first, uh, uh, first, I guess, animation. Well, I guess not. That's hard to explain. So in from 1997 to 2001, I worked with Bruce Rogers of Tribe Design. He's a production designer and working on live shows, like I said. So these were mostly Bruce would design stage shows, but these would be big stage shows we worked on at the time, like it was Ricky Martin and Mariah Carey, a bunch of different large acts like that. And he now does all the Super Bowl shows. And so in 2001, he got Madonna's contract to do her stage show, and they needed some. They had some visuals that were being done for their background, and then it turned out that she wanted to make a video that was kind of like a mix video for a remix song that she did. And they wanted to take various videos and then put them into these CG environments. And so Bruce actually got me this job, and we worked with I put together a small team of people. It was one of the roughest jobs I've ever had in my entire life.
Why is that?
One, because we didn't really know what we were doing. Two, the deadline was super duper tight, and it was under, there was so many different kind of complications regarding it. It was my first job as a young adult working, and so I didn't know how to manage anything at all. And it was, but the amazing, it was, things were so different back then. We were doing it, we did it all in Maya, and we were just rendering with the Maya renderer at this time.
This is before you transitioned to Houdini, right?
Yeah, this is 2001,
right, okay.
And so. Yeah, so we rendered all with the Maya software renderer and rendered in different passes so that we could give it all to like a flame artist. But we had a lot of rendering to do. And when we finally figured that out, we ended up getting a render farm at the time that came from this place called Kaiser Wozak that's not even around anymore. And like they brought it down literally on a dolly, 64 machines. They were like 1U units at the time. And we got it up in rendering at the time. And I remember, once we plugged everything in and we were rendering about 10 minutes, just shut the power off on the whole place at like 2 in the morning. And so it was a huge learning experience for me on a variety of ways.
And on a project for which there wasn't much pressure, it was just Madonna.
It was an enormous amount of pressure. Oh my God. I deal with pressure pretty well. I can deal with pressure.
Apparently, yeah.
I somehow,
seems you actually thrive on it.
Yeah, right. I tend to kind of like bottle it all up and deal with it and kind of grin and bear it and move through it. I've been on some very, when you're in the VR company that I was the technical director of, we would, like the Lytro job, we said yes to that job. That was probably crazy, the amount of rendering that we had to do. It's about a minute of CG times 310, because there's 310 cameras. And so the pressure was just, it was just overwhelming, but yet you just kind of suck it up, know that it's going to work out somehow. And if you hit a bottleneck, you figure out and hopefully you get through it. It was a rough job too. I've never had a job fail, which I think that's, maybe I have, I'd have to think about it, but like, I'm not in a very, 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 very long time. So I'm pretty good at calculated risk, but it can be very stressful. My wife gets, sick of me.
What are you doing, Jordan?
Yeah. And then in the end of it, I'm like exhausted, so.
But in a satisfying way, I would imagine, yeah?
Sometimes, yeah, usually. I haven't been in that situation in quite a while. I've been trying to be a little bit more tempered about, and luckily I can do my research under the guise of USC and not on a client's dollar a lot of the time. So,
but I think the moral of the story is sometimes you got to take risks, right? And you use the word calculated risks, and if you want to really achieve some new artistic heights, it's going to happen by stepping out of your comfort zone, right?
Absolutely. This is, I don't know I mean, my upbringing probably made that more my modus operandi. It's not always beneficial, but it can be in certain situations. But I definitely believe you should take risks. You know, artists should always take risks, right? And you should also always do what you want to be doing, and I mean, as much as you can be. I mean, obviously, you have to always have. There's always somebody above. This is one thing that I've always learned about too. Is there's always somebody above you telling you what to do. Even when you have your own company and your own clients, and you're working on your own projects, or you have a research department, or you're researching this, or there's always someone there. There's a wall that you've got to hit. You know, and so. You know, I believe that, like, as much as you can, being, you know, responsible for your own work ethic and making sure that you work as hard as you can for what you're working for, no matter what the project is kind of how I always try to, like, focus on things too. I took a job like last in November that was a commercial that was not, it was a really terrible budget for the most part, but it presented some interesting things. Actually, we rendered some of it on your farm as well, by the way. It was, the thing that was interesting to me about it was that they wanted to basically reconstruct a bunch of a construction site downtown. One of the buildings they were building, like a huge, one of the high rises. So it's quite interesting just to get to access that.
In Los Angeles, yeah?
Yeah, downtown on Figueroa, they're building one of the buildings, and this guy was putting together a commercial. We got access to it, but the idea was to rebuild the whole place with photogrammetry, and to be able to match move it in. And a friend of mine, David Sudd, who's an amazing match mover and photogrammetry artist, and person that I work with, my Shayu, who's kind of my partner, went and, you know, so we basically, like, you shoot with like a distro, you record all the points, build all the photogrammetry, you get an accurate representation, and then you can use like 3D equalizer and match move it in. And then we built these reconstructed point cloud worlds for this commercial, and it was quite beautiful. And it was a very, very low budget, you know, but it allowed us to, you know, kind of explore this method of working that we've been working on for a while, made us some pretty pictures. And to me, that's much more interesting sometimes than having a well-paid job, right? So,
so seems like that's an example of where your tinkering actually found some commercial value. And if you
had the client's dollar,
yeah, exactly. And if you hadn't been doing the tinkering, if you hadn't had that inquisitive nature, you know, that opportunity would probably never have come your way, right?
100%. I mean, and you know, we were the same. You know, another example was some of the workflows that we've developed right now that we're working on a lot, that we're putting together, especially now with the world of virtual production. This was kind of like before virtual production was a thing, but like in 2018, I worked on a movie that shot all in Croatia, and I worked with, again, with David Sudd. And the idea was that we just, you know, reconstructed everything, cataloged all the sets. And then the idea for us was that, you know, with rebuilding the photogrammetry correctly, so that is correct scale and orientation 100%, we can then undistort the camera lens, match move that stuff in, and we could have multiple cameras match moved into one 3D scene. And then we could do like real-time work. And we did real-time work, and we were using Touch Designer for this, which is a real-time application that's a lot like Houdini. It's written by the same person who wrote Houdini. And so it allows us to just quickly make changes, render it in real time, kind of like Unreal, but a little bit different. But we could also work that directly into like an Unreal rendering pipeline, which is something that we're doing a lot of these days.
Okay, Jordan, let's shift gears a little bit, because I know you mentioned you started out in Maya. I know you are deep into Houdini today. I know there's a lot of people who are in that same place right now. They're Maya users or some other 3D solution. They perhaps might be looking to move to a more powerful package and solution like Houdini. You've been down that road. You've faced that mountain. You know, you had at some point you had to make a decision to shift your technical go-to platform from Maya to Houdini. So I'm curious, what were the circumstances that even made you entertain that choice? And then what was the, what was it like? What did you do to actually make that transition? I think lots of people will be interested to know.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, I teach Houdini, and I teach Houdini in the film school where a lot of people learn Maya, and
This is at
so
USC, right?
yeah, absolutely,
There
absolutely.
aren't many schools that teach Houdini, are there?
I think SCAD teaches Houdini, and I think that it's, I think that that's actually changing a lot because of, like a lot of the games departments now are focusing a lot on Houdini because
Right.
it's just really becoming dominant in the Houdini, the Unreal and Unity pipeline is so amazing that so many world building and things like this are doing this. So I think it's more and more. But yes, it's not like it's not taught like Maya is taught, but Maya, I have, I'm not gonna, this is definitely not going to be an endorsement of Maya. So any Maya lovers out there, I'm apologizing in advance. The problem, I love Maya. I never had any idea that I would actually be switching, to tell you the truth. When I switched, I came from a much harder pipeline and that I was using previously. And I started working with Maya at 1.5. I still use Maya. I mean, not really, just to keep up with it. But I thought it was amazing. I really did. The history and being able to go back and kind of edit things, and I love the hypershade. And then in 2005, I was given like a 1-week training course in Houdini, a digital domain. And I just got in. I had no idea what I was going to be doing. In all honesty, I'd heard about Houdini, and I knew that it was kind of like, oh, wow, Houdini, that's, whatever. And so I was like, I went and did it. And truthfully, it was a rough week. There's no doubt about it. But the one thing that became really super clear to me was that it was actually absolutely amazing, and that it was all the things kind of that Maya wasn't, right? And at that time, learning Houdini was exceptionally difficult, right? The software is extremely expensive. They didn't have a Houdini Indie like they do now. They didn't even have the free version yet, actually, either, Houdini Apprentice.
When you say it was difficult to learn, I assume that's because of the lack of learning materials?
And learning materials and access to the software. There was really almost zero tutorials and access to the software. And so what I did, honestly, I called Side Effects in Santa Monica. And I was lucky enough that the woman who's no longer there, Aliza, I went down and I met her and I talked with her, and she was like, just come here and learn Houdini. We'll give you access to all of our...
So hold on, Jordan, hold on. So you had 1 week, and it seems like you were hooked. At that. I mean, you're to put this into perspective, you were a very solid Maya user prior to that week.
Yes.
Then you had this week of training, which was hell. And then suddenly you completely decide to transition. So why?
It wasn't that it was hell. It was that it was like introduced all these concepts that had been kind of, that Maya like hides from you behind the scenes, and like, so one of the things that I always kind of like show people when we talk about the relationship between like, what's the difference between Maya and what's the difference between Houdini, when you're using Maya, you don't really have to know like what a float is, what's really composing a vector. When we're moving something and transforming it in 3-dimensional space, what does that mean? When we center our pivot, what does that mean? And what are the core components that like make up 3D? And Houdini, like, you have to know a little bit more about that kind of stuff. So at first it can be a little bit intimidating, but the reality is this just opens up a whole world to you. And that it gave me some semblance of that, I think, when I first had it and I saw the power of it.
Is that what drew you in, that opportunity, that potential?
Two things drew me in to Houdini was just the procedural nature of it and how it differed from Maya's history and what it was really was proceduralism. And then, in all honesty, at that time, the copy node, Maya's copy, we use Maya's copy node a lot, like in what Adam, we were talking earlier, and he mentioned one thing that, I mentioned one thing that I always say to Maya people, which is, if you had to have a scene with 310 cameras and one scene in Maya, how would you do that? And people, they just kind of like roll their eyes and say, I don't know. And then I was talking with Adam earlier, and he was saying, well, let's make a box, let's duplicate it, let's make an array of boxes. So you duplicate special this way, duplicate special this way, and you've got a grid by grid of 100. Now let's change that. And then let's start putting things, instead of a box matrix, let's make it random and have a sphere in a box and a triangle, and let's put something directly on top of the box. And so the exposure to the copy node in Houdini 5 and copy stamping, which is the old way of kind of iterating through a loop, was really just mind-boggling to me, and I knew that it was something that was very powerful.
Got it. Okay, so I know you've got some really interesting projects that you have recently done in Houdini, and there was an example that we were talking about. I think it was a commercial that you recently did, and you were talking about how it was under super time pressure, and you were conveying that the power of and flexibility of Houdini allowed you to actually do this project. Maybe do you want to go there and
sure.
some of those screenshots you talked about?
Let me share my screen, and let me pull up the video. Give me one moment here to just pull up the video, and I will share my screen. I won't share the whole video, but I will. So it was basically what the idea was. It's a commercial for Miller Lite, and initially they were going to render it in Unity, and so Pierre from Golden had reached out to me, and I started working on it. We had a very, very, very fast turnaround. We had to build all of the environments, animate everything, and so we used this kind of hybrid games approach that was for Decentraland. So the aesthetic of it had to be this kind of low res Decentraland proxy kind of world, so very flat game kind of shading, but then we added a little bit more. It was rendered in Redshift. But my job was to build out a lot of the environments, get a lot of the animation repeated, build out the crowd system, and build out variations, and build out the bulk of the environments. So I can just play. So we built out this giant theater, this woman opening, everything was all procedural. These worlds were all built in Houdini.
So just sorry, Jordan. Yeah. I think again, in the interest of the Maya users, when you say it's procedural, what's the implications of it being procedural from a practical point of view, a practical project?
Yeah. So I mean, here let's look at this crowd system, right? I'm not using crowds. I love Houdini's crowd system, but this was so simple that we didn't even need to use it. So I basically, I needed to be able to populate this with a giant group of characters really efficiently and quickly. And so here's the Houdini scene. And it's actually really just simple. It's just a single character in T-pose. And I used the new kind effects in Houdini in order to be able to bring in a few different animations. So up here, these are just literally Mixamo animations. I went and got some, seating up and cheering. There's not even that many of them. There's only 4 as an example. And then you can use these bone deforms. And then here I'm running it just through a for loop, right? And the idea of that is that in here, you can see as an example, this is the points from all of the seats, right? So in the construction of the seats, I just make sure that I include a point in there. And then I can give it some various attributes in randomization. And in the end, I just cut it in half. So I only have half the arena because that's all we need. and you can see that there's a bunch of different attributes on there: animation switch, orient, and p-scale. And then the idea of the for loop in Houdini is really just one of the most powerful things that there is. The idea of this is what they call for each points. So it operates on each individual point, and it allows you to create iterations and move through something. So you basically are operating on one thing. So if I was to like click here, right, there's my one character, and you can see he's clapping, whatever, right? But because we're doing it in a for loop, it allows me to iterate over with some very simple expressions, and then basically to be able to like assign, this is some Vex code that just basically assigns some IDs. And then here you'll see it's going to take a second to rebuild this. Hopefully it'll be okay with Zoom. Sometimes Zoom can steal the power. There it goes. And we end up getting our crowd of people, and each one has now has an instance ID, right? ID right there, which then allows me to basically propagate all these different colors and put them across the board so that you can randomize how things are differently colored. You'll see momentarily. So we get a giant crowd. It's really a very simple system. It took me about, maybe 4 hours of putting this all together, not from scratch because I'd already had other things. But then here's the real fascinating thing about Houdini and the way that Houdini works is because Houdini is so efficient and can create these really good hierarchical data structures. If you look here, you can see that we have 37 million points, which is just try to open that in Maya, right? 37 million polygons rather, 602,700. And you can see that it's taking up 9.25 gigabytes of information. And this is direct memory consumption. So if you set your things up correctly and you've worked in and you've kind of put a few things that you've done to your geometry correctly, you can do this thing called packing. And this will work in, it's an alembic. So you can export alembics because they're a hierarchical data structure. We'll use this data. And you can see now that the memory footprint, literally we have one pack geo and the memory footprint of it goes down to 2.8 kilobytes. And you can't, you can't select anything anymore. The geometry kind of becomes locked and all of the attributes kind of become written down onto one point. And now, when you render, obviously it's going to take up much more memory than a 2.8 kilobytes, but that is the actual memory that it's taking up on your CPU for processing it, right? Once you pass it to the renderer, that will change, but not as crazily.
So for during the creative process, this gives you a whole lot more freedom and flexibility, particularly if you have a low powered machine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you like, I mean, this will take, I mean, in Redshift, right? Without this, the render was like an hour per frame. And once this goes on correctly, what goes back down to a normal 4 or 5 minute per frame, just how it is using the memory. And I mean, it also just load up in etc. So then they can just get written out to like an alembic and you can render it in cinema or whatever you want,
So the procedural framework that you have set up allows you, if your client says, hey, Jordan, I like what you've done here, but we need to make a small change, and whatever that small change is.
They did it many times.
Yeah. So yeah, give us maybe a practical example of that happening. Because I think this is also
yeah, here, let me show. I have this other one here. This is a test bed, so this is not like a final product or anything along those lines, right? But this is basically the same kind of conceptual methodology, So you could imagine, like in this situation, like let's say they want to control the color palettes of all the different t-shirts on there. Well, the way that we have it is that they're ramp controllable. So like the art director comes by and they want to completely change out all the different color palettes on everything, then it's just a matter of switching out the color palettes on a ramp, and you can iterate really quickly this way. I always take a tool approach to everything that I do. So as an example, like for instance, let me show here, let's do, we build out a bunch of different procedural tools as an example to be able to procedurally model, and we take this approach to everything that we do. And so we have everything that we have basically becomes some kind of tool eventually that gets put into this system so that we can make changes really easily. I almost always approach all projects this way. And I have a large, extensive set of tools for building out a variety of things. And, as an example, like when I'm working on projects, I either use the tools that we have or I adopt the tools that we have for some other kind of thing. So as an example, this crowd system was made somewhere else. You can see that I have something similar right here. So it allows you to be able to move really fast because you can actually build tools that you can reuse over and over and over and over again. So when you've developed some kind of good methodology, eventually you build up a little bit of a library of those kinds of things,
So you can, for any given project that comes along, you can leverage that prior work to help accelerate the new project.
And you can build it into your own pipeline. So you can see here, I have all my tools are here. They're all really well organized. And like we use them for everything from, world building in Unreal and Unity.
Yeah, what you're showing there, Jordan, is something you've created, right? This wouldn't be coming with Houdini.
Oh yeah, no. These are all proprietary tools that we've built. Like here's one for making bridges. So we can make all kinds of different bridges. I have a lot of different things for building out architectural worlds and things like this, so we can make and feed those into other tools, and et cetera. So we have a large variety of tools that we built for all kinds of different situations,
Those tools seem like they would be universally applicable, not just for your own purposes. Have you thought of making them available somehow to others?
Well, we're looking into, we have a certain, a lot of these are proprietary tools that we use, and we do, yes, we do, here's another one. This is like one, I love this is a simple tool here for hanging cloth, like if you, and this is one of the great things about how Houdini just functions is that, like you can just like literally just make these really simple tools that I'm no brainiac, and I build them a lot for going into Unreal Engine and Unity. So I am thinking of a way of putting them out into the world, but also, I'm very interested right now in Web 3.0, Web 3 technology. So we have a lot of this world building stuff that we want to do for the web. And I don't want to just release the tools so everyone has access to my tools, kind of, but it's a tough question for me.
Yeah, no, I can understand, because this in some ways gives you an artistic competitive advantage. So yeah, it's a challenging question. Understood.
Huge, depending on what it is. Yeah. First,
Jordan, we just a time check to let you know we have about 8 minutes left. I think we've, or at least I've covered a lot of your career and how you began your Houdini journey, and what are some of the advantages of that and why you took that route. But is there anything else that you want to cover before we?
Yeah, I'll show a few quick things if you want.
Yeah, please.
I'll
Please
show
do.
you. I'll show you. Let's see. I want to. Let me unique find. There's a few things that I wanted to show. So, I mean, truthfully, this show here is probably one of my proudest. One of the things that I'm the proudest of, this is the Amon Tobin projection mapping show that we did at V Squared Labs. It was an awesome job to be a part of. It was really only 4 artists on our end working. There's Touch Designer working, which is like Houdini, but it's a different piece of software. And you know, there's Carlos Saw working on his world. He's working in 3D Studio. I mean, in Cinema 4D. Carlos, a great artist. And you know, this was kind of like, after coming off Michael Jackson and working on this job, this is one of the jobs that really made me interested in the merger of technology and rendering and doing all the different kinds of things that this introduced me to. I had known about Touch Designer, but this was the job that I really started first using Touch Designer on, and then doing some projection mapping. This is Davey Force's look. And then there's the live show with Amon Tobin.
That's cool
in there.
stuff. Very cool.
And so yeah, there's one of
Hey Jordan, if somebody wanted to take a peek at this, would this be on your website?
Yeah, this is all on my website.
Do you want to quickly mention what the URL is for that?
Yeah, it's jordanhalsey.com, just my name, .com, JORDANHALSEY. And then I'll just show this one real quick too. I did this with my friend Adam. There was a bunch of people involved on this, and the idea was to be able to drive a go-kart in VR, and so you're actually wearing a helmet, and so you can't see the world. And then we build it, the world's out in Houdini, to be able to match the real world environment very accurately so that we don't have any problems, and then syncing it up and aligning the two for virtual reality. And so, like this was also kind of like the beginning of a little bit of my kind of, really much more kind of current real-time kind of data input information.
That is really
stuff,
cool. I want to give that a try.
Stuff that we wanted to do, So the one thing I'll show real quick too is just for people that are interested. And if you do happen to know a little bit of Houdini, I wanted just to mention that there is this software here. It's Touch Designer. It's an amazing piece of software too, and you can learn it for free. And there are free versions a little different than Houdini, which you can learn it, and then if you ever buy it, it's only $600. You can it's the same file format, so you just like sign in with your license and make a license. But this is like what we use a lot for like projection mapping. It's a great piece of software to work in conjunction with Houdini if you're a Houdini artist, and it allows you to kind of like explore things in real time. And just like Houdini, it has a lot of the same naming and constructs, so SOPs and CHOPs and stuff like that. It's quite an interesting program as well that not that many people are as familiar with. But
that's interesting because GridMarkets is looking to support various complementary solutions to Houdini. For example, we recently announced support for the Axiom solver, and there's others to follow. I'm wondering, maybe we can take this up after.
The thing about it, I think that we could talk about it. I think it's a very different because it's real time.
Okay.
It's all real time, so it's all GPU based real time stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
But yeah. So.
All right, Jordan. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to be rude and transition to landing the webinar. But before I do it, really interesting career. You're a risk taker. You've done things that other people would probably be loath to do, or certainly very afraid to do, I should say. So I think you've inspired people with your risk taking, but it's not foolish risk taking. It's, as you said, it's calculated risk taking. There are many things that you have done prior to actually taking the risk, which has lowered the risk. I think you've also done that out of necessity as well, but also out of curiosity. You seem to be, it just tinkering is, as you said, is something that drives you. And so I think that's a really interesting message and inspirational for all the other artists who are out there. So Jordan, thanks for sharing that story with us. Really appreciate it. It's fascinating.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing real quick, which is I've used your service to get me through tough rendering solutions in the past. It's always worked fantastic for me. That's the one that I recommend. I've recommended it to students and other people as well. And so thank you very much for having me. I think you're a great, interesting company with what you're doing.
Well, happy to hear those kind words. Thank you, Jordan. In fact, if you hadn't used it, we wouldn't have met you. So that's kind of how we got here today. So thanks for those kind words, Jordan. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and remind everyone of the promotional code. If you want to take advantage of it, just give me a second here to transition. And there we go. Jordan, can you see that? Just out of curiosity. Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, as a reminder, here's the promo code. Use that, get 15% discount on any credits you buy with us. And I also wanted to give everyone a heads up that our next webinar is with the infamous Kate. She's been with us before. I think a lot of you know her. She's very well known. She and GridMarkets are working together on some molecular simulations and visualizations. And so she's going to be talking about, like you, Jordan, she's developed some Houdini procedures that will facilitate the creation of molecules and the visualization of molecules. You created
this
ones
is what?
Yes, I was going to say, it's got kind of analogous to the tools that you created to help instantly create bridges in Houdini and so on. So she's creating some tools which are helping.
This is Whitini. Is that what this is?
I'm not sure, right? Yeah, I think she's creating the tools within Houdini, and so we're going to be talking about that in her upcoming webinar. Check it out and join us if you'd like at gridmarkets.com/webinars. You'll see the location there that you can use to attend the webinar, which is on May 24th. Okay, so that's it, everyone. Thank you again, Jordan, for attending. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us, and thank you, Ben, for speaking about Oracle and how the platform is robustly engineered and secured. So appreciate that. Adam, thank you. And with that, we'll bring it to a close.